I can go through it and just kind of give you an overview of what we have. And then if y'all have any questions, certainly, or if you have a question at any point during the discussion here, feel free to buzz in. It's pretty informal. I would say the first thing to make, the first comment to make here is, and we do have some public comments on this item, but this is not an aesthetic plan. This is just a PowerPoint presentation of discussion items that may need to be considered should we pursue the development of an aesthetic plan or a more enhanced aesthetic plan. So I just want to make that clear for the record that this is actually not an aesthetic plan. Just to give you a little overview, what is an aesthetic plan, at least from what we're talking about at this point, as it relates to small wireless facilities, and this is within the public rights-of-ways. That's an important distinction I want to make with this discussion. The aesthetic plan is only dealing with public rights-of-ways. It's not dealing with infrastructure that's outside of the public right-of-way. So under the state law, the definition of an aesthetic plan is pretty broad in the 2018 legislation that was passed. It can include a resolution, a regulation, a policy, a site plan, even an approved plat if it has certain standards. The key really is that, and you can grandfather items that predate the aesthetic plan, but the key thing moving forward is that whatever utilities or structures you apply the plan to, you have to be consistent and you can't discriminate. So whatever you require for LCUB, you would have to require for KUB or AT&T or whomever. So that's kind of the key aspect of the state law, that you're not discriminating on any particular entity that may have the privilege of putting structures within the public rights-of-ways. So if you step back and kind of look at, when I start to work on an ordinance or a resolution or something, I always step back and try to figure out what is my end result, what are my goals that I'm trying to accomplish with this undertaking. What are the things that the community is trying to maybe address with an aesthetic plan or an enhanced aesthetic plan. And some of the things that come to at least to the staff's mind, obviously, is to try to continue to promote the appearance of our public rights-of-ways. We have an outstanding public works and engineering staff that do a great job in presenting our community, and our public spaces, our public rights-of-ways are key to that. So we want to try to minimize visual clutter in those spaces as much as we can, and try to promote consistency and compatibility, particularly with new vertical structures that may go in the public rights-of-ways. And all that is intended to try to protect developed properties in particular from the impacts of new vertical utility structures or underground installations that relate to vertical utility structures. So those are some of the, and then of course envisioning future technologies, which is always very challenging to try to see, boy, I wish we'd have thought of that 10 years ago kind of approach, because some of these things, the technology is constantly evolving, and the legal atmosphere is also constantly evolving. So those are some of the town-specific goals that we may look at in the development of an aesthetic plan. We actually have elements of current regulations in place that would constitute an aesthetic plan under the definition that I previously showed you. One thing that the town has been consistent about is the application of a section of the Tennessee Code that requires Planning Commission review and approval of new utilities. We're very good about that. All these utility extensions, whether they're underground or overhead or whatever, they come before the Planning Commission for your all's review and approval, mainly for coordination purposes, because the Planning Commission is the entity that should be most familiar with the built environment of a community, and therefore if somebody's proposing work in the public space of the community, the Planning Commission should have the knowledge and guidance to provide to that individual so that they don't improperly install something that they didn't know about a road improvement project that was coming the next year and things like that. So we also have in our subdivision regulations the requirement for all utilities to be placed underground. And that's been a requirement for many, many years in the town. Even new non-local streets like Parkside Drive and South Campbell Station Road, Municipal Center Drive, those are all have underground utilities. So that's been a big aspect of utility aesthetics for decades in the town. In our architectural design standards, it also talks about installing new utility service systems underground. And then, hang on here, go back. We also have some provisions that we adopted in 2017 when we created some language in the zoning ordinance to deal with antennas and towers, macro and small cell support structures. I did not include some of the things that we do have on the books because the state law that was passed in 2018 basically nullified some of those provisions. And so, a lot of what you see there on the screen is what we have that we can use with the current state law. We try to meet with applicants early on with any utility projects to try to minimize the impacts, whether it's an underground installation or an above ground installation. And then we encourage them to apply as stealth the technology as possible and to try to, prioritize where the facilities are going to lessen the impacts, namely on residential areas. So with all those existing provisions that we have, there could be additional options that we may want to consider to enhance an aesthetic plan, namely for utilities within our public rights of ways. There's many ways you could deal with this because you do have a lot of flexibility in the state law. But one thing is to actually just adopt a separate section, potentially the municipal code for aesthetics. You could do that by ordinance or resolution. There's pros and cons to both. It might be a little easier to change the language in the future if it's only resolution. But then again, it may be a little more concrete if it's adopted by ordinance. So those are things that we would have to talk about as we move forward. Something that we need to look at too is just kind of reviewing the existing provisions and to try to, within the parameters of the legal framework that we're given, address the aesthetics equally for this new vertical utility infrastructure that we may see. And the void that we would be trying to fill is to try, this thing keeps jumping ahead here. The void we would be trying to fill is, I think, really more clearly defining this concept of stealth technology. That language first came out when we developed the antennas and towers revisions in 2017. But be a little more prescriptive with our requirements. eliminate some subjectivity, and then really just try to capitalize on what we can do consistent with the state law as it would apply to, namely, the appearance of vertical infrastructure. We had to make some assumptions on this that deal with the current system that we have. One of those assumptions is that the town will continue to take utility projects through our planning commission. The other is, another one is that we can't create laws or provisions within the aesthetic plan that would be in violation of federal or state law. We can't, for example, in the aesthetic plan say that no new vertical poles can be taller than 20 feet anywhere in town, because we know that would be in violation of some state law. So we have to be cognizant of that, and whatever we come up with, obviously has to be consistent with federal and state law. We will continue to require new utilities to be installed underground. I think that's been a very important aspect of the town's aesthetic plan that we have and have had for a long time. There are going to be some new utilities that will have to be above ground. They're going to have a vertical component in order to function, like a street light or a telecommunications antenna. So really, the aesthetic plan that we're thinking of here is primarily going to relate to new utilities that require a vertical component to function, because really all the other utilities are going to be underground if they're new. Now, we have some existing overhead utility distribution lines and transmission line systems throughout the town. Distribution lines are going to be those overhead systems that basically they're kind of like a collector street on a major road plan. They take the power generated from the major transmission lines, which is kind of your interstate electricity lines, and they transfer that to individual customers. So most of our lines, like along Kingston Pike, internal to subdivisions that have overhead utilities, are going to be distribution lines. So we acknowledge that those systems are in place. We're not going to go out and put them underground. However, if somebody is putting in a completely new development or new street, they would be required to put all the utilities that can be placed underground, and anything that is above ground would have to comply with whatever aesthetic requirements that we may want to adopt consistently with all those type of structures. There is a permitting process required, and I think we want to continue for the privilege, really, of using the town's property in the form of its rights-of-ways. That is the town's property, or TDOT's property in the case of Kingston Pike, and, people that enter that property and do things on that property have to be approved by the owner. So that process is going to continue. And something else that we're proposing, at least at this time, the aesthetic requirements would not really address subdivision streetlights, because most of the time those are either not in the public right-of-way or on the edge. They also have a lot of different variations. They're limited to 16 feet in overall height. They are not even really required by the town. Most of the time, newer developments put them in on the front end because it's a marketing element. But for a number of reasons, we're not thinking of including those in an aesthetic plan this time. So some of the guiding principles, I think, just stepping back, that we may want to try to accomplish given these assumptions, is to try to limit the number and address the physical characteristics of new vertical utility infrastructure, and see if there's opportunities to share existing systems, whether it's an existing overhead distribution line system or a system that just has street lights currently in place, and then to try to control to the greatest extent possible the aesthetic impact of new installations. So those are some of the, I think, guiding principles we may be working toward with that. So what maybe should be prescribed in an aesthetic plan? We would look at the type of pole, for example. We need to get, again, very prescriptive and be clear on what we're talking about with stealth technology, the type of pole, the arrangement of equipment on a pole, how the pole should be used, dimensional parameters for all the vertical utility structures that may be associated with that deployment. And then parameters that are appropriate for the specific type of vertical utility. So one of the things that, in looking at other communities, I know Oak Ridge has an aesthetic plan. There's a lot of other communities in other areas that have developed aesthetic plans, but really one of the first things that I did was just to kind of look at our town and evaluate what kind of vertical utilities we currently have in place so that we know what we're working with on the front end. The most common vertical utilities that we have are going to be existing utility poles with utility lines. Those may or may not have lighting. Then you got the type 2 is going to be a utility pole that only has street lighting. That's going to be stuff like you see on South Campbell Station Road or Parkside Drive. Then you're going to have a type 3 that is essentially a type 2 pole with one other utility, most likely a telecommunications utility. And then a type 4 pole is a completely new freestanding pole for a single utility. So 3 of the 4 types that we have either in place or could have are already existing. And getting back to some of those goals for aesthetics is, evaluate your existing infrastructure and see if you can use that before you go to a type 4 pole and actually add a new vertical structure in the community. So let's go through those types real quick here. Type 1, existing utility poles with utility lines. That's typically within the rights of ways. That's going to be your distribution lines. They're common along the older local streets and our arterial and collector streets. Wooden poles are probably the most common material for those. They're also generally less than 50 feet in height. Transmission line poles are typically much taller, and oftentimes those are not going to be within public rights of ways, and they really won't be part of the aesthetic plan because of how they're regulated. You're very limited on what you can require in relation to transmission lines. They're kind of, again, your interstate electric lines. So mainly we'd be dealing with distribution lines as far as using those systems for new vertical structures. So again, one thing, you want to look at if somebody comes to the staff and the Planning Commission ultimately with a project for new vertical utilities, we look at what we have in place already so that we're not adding new poles and new structures in the community if possible. So there's just some photographs of different distribution lines. Actually, the one on the left is a new metal pole on Concord Road and South Campbell Station Road. And it will have, it has a lot of decorative light fixtures we'll talk about a little bit later. You got wood poles on local streets on the other 2 pictures there. There's that Concord Road pole with the decorative light fixture. Then you've got more of a traditional light fixture in the lower right there on McPhee Road, I believe. And then these are transmission line poles, which really aren't part of the aesthetic plan for a number of reasons, but most of the time they're not even in the public rights of ways. They're usually on platted private easements, just like we were looking at with the Gibson Farm earlier. That's a transmission line easement that runs through that property. So it's not going to be governed by the aesthetic plan. So some of the requirements that we would be looking for if somebody was wanting to add new structures to a type 1 pole, obviously you'd have to comply with the utility provider or whoever owns the pole and make sure that you meet all the requirements that they may have for clearance, for structural capacity, and other safety related provisions. Any non-light fixture structures attached to the pole would need to be shrouded, and so that there would be no new equipment generally that would be protruding horizontally beyond any existing equipment that's mounted to the pole. And then we would need to probably provide some dimensional parameters for shrouds for different types of utility structures. We wouldn't want to see additional ground-mounted equipment. So some of the things that you might see on a pole, and this was taken from another community, some of the aesthetic objectives with trying to use a type 1 pole is you want to try to shroud that equipment. You want to keep the equipment close to the pole to minimize that additional bulk, and then try to make the equipment consistent between components. So paint everything the same color, and paint it the same color as the pole, make it all kind of look seamless. So what we want to try to avoid would be installations like this where they're kind of just dangling off the pole. There's just wires everywhere. It just looks like a real mess. And then try to encourage something like this where you got a telecommunications antenna at the top of this wood pole. Then you got the equipment structure mounted to the side, but it's mounted close to the pole. Doesn't look, bulky. It looks, aesthetically pleasing for that type of pole. So the second type is our utility poles that just have street lighting. Those are typically steel, and steel I'm talking about either aluminum or galvanized steel. Either one would be technically steel. They're common along arterial streets where other utilities are underground. Parkside Drive and South Campbell Station Road, I mentioned, both have only street lights as their vertical utility structures. This does not include subdivision street lights. Again, if somebody comes before the town wanting to put a new vertical utility structure in, on, let's say, Parkside Drive or South Campbell Station Road, we would have them take a look at the existing type 2 poles that are there to try to use those, which would probably most likely require replacement to accommodate the additional structure. And those are going to be generally from 30 to 50 feet in height. Here's some examples of those type poles. Some of the requirements that we may want to consider in relation to type 2 poles, again, complying with the entity that owns the pole, trying to make sure that new structures are consistent from pole to pole along the same street. We would encourage using round galvanized steel poles. They're going to be more structurally sound and more able to conceal new equipment within the pole. We'd want to make sure that replacement poles can match the existing color and lighting fixtures, designs, all that thing as what you would have on the remainder of that corridor. Wouldn't want to see any new equipment housed outside of the pole. We would want everything internal to the pole and underground. No new equipment would be mounted to protrude from the exterior of the pole, and we'd want to see the conduit and wiring within the pole as well. So that we don't want to see installations like this where you've got the wiring exposed, structures protruding out from the pole, Again, this is not quite as bad, but it still could be greatly improved. We wouldn't want to see these type of installations. So when you're talking about replacement poles, whether it's a type 2 or 3, or even a new pole under the type 4, there's different components that we would maybe want to look at from an aesthetic consideration. Of course, the foundation is going to have to be engineered, and that would be dependent on the type of pole and the equipment envisioned on the pole. You have an equipment cabinet, which is generally going to be on the lower part of the pole. You've got the upper pole, which is just the main pole section. Then you've got, in the case of the type 2 and 3 poles, a luminaire and mast arm. And then you would have a cantenna, which is basically just a telecommunications antenna with shrouding around it. And then the hardware that would service the equipment on the pole. So some of the requirements that we may want to consider in relation to these components, one of the things is, as I've looked at through some of these other communities, is as you work your way up the pole from the ground to the top, you transition to different sections of the pole, and you want to make sure that you have a smooth transition shroud in each of those sections so that it all has kind of a seamless look to it. Obviously, the foundation would have to be engineered, and we would most likely want to consider some dimensional limitations for each of the components that would go on the vertical utility so that you cap, the dimensions and somebody doesn't get, completely out of control with the width of, say, an equipment cabinet or an antenna, and you keep everything as close to the pole as possible. You want to make sure all those wires are hidden from view. They need to be in the pole. And then the light that is on the pole would be part of an aesthetic plan because we really would need to, at least in my view, we need to think about our non-local street lighting and think about what we want to see in the future in those areas so that we can coordinate that with other vertical utilities. So some examples of acceptable poles, I'm not saying the light fixtures would necessarily be acceptable, but this gives you the idea. It looks very stealth. It's kind of like the pole that actually Verizon was proposing at the Cove at Turkey Creek. It was a very stealth, 26-foot tall pole. They did propose a street light there to try to match the Cove at Turkey Creek, but it's along the lines of that type of look where it's all seamless. You transition with the transition shrouds throughout the entire pole section, and it doesn't look real busy. You have all the wiring contained within the pole. Some cross-section examples that you might want to represent in your aesthetic plan for the different sections would be something like this. This particular example shows both a 4 and 5G option in relation to at least the telecommunications aspect of the structure. It has a light fixture, and then the pole on the left is either 4 or 5G. The pole on the right is both 4 and 5G and a light fixture. So it's actually a tri-function pole on the right. The third type is very similar to type 2. It's really type 2 with that has accommodated telecommunication structures. And these are the ones that we have currently out on Parkside Drive area. These are what we call combination poles. They're more than just street lights. They provide for at least 2 different utilities. The poles have to be replaced pretty much in order to accommodate an additional utility. The existing type 3 poles that we have in place would be non-compliant with, and they'd be grandfathered in, but they would be non-compliant with at least what the staff is envisioning for the aesthetic plan as it would relate to type 3 poles. The existing poles have antennas that, and we'll see these in the examples, that protrude from the pole. They're not consistent. The antennas aren't consistent between different providers. They're not consistent on where they're mounted on the pole either. And part of this could be the light fixture placement on these poles. That was what was expressed to me by the applicants as to why they had to extend the antenna outward from the pole, was because the light is at the very top. So that's something we need to think about when we come up with a light fixture. If we want to come up with a light fixture, it's where that fixture is going to be situated on the pole so that we can provide for antennas that will be as stealth as possible. So some of the examples that we have in place, I'm sure you all have seen these. Zayo, back in 2015, I think, 2016, put up 3 poles, 2 in the Parkside Drive area and 1 on Campbell Lakes Drive. And then just recently, AT&T put up a pole on Parkside Drive, and that's what's shown in the lower right or lower left 2 images. And what the issue there is you can see the antennas do protrude away from the pole. They're not stealth like some of the images that we saw earlier. And then they're very inconsistent in the types of antennas that you see, and really where they're situated on the pole. The Zayo antennas are much closer to the top than the AT&T. So we'd want to try to, make those consistent moving forward with the aesthetic plan. Again, this is showing what you don't want to see with future installations. And again, the same examples that we looked at earlier, what you may want to see with future installations. You can see that the light fixture is not at the top, it's lower, so that you can get those antennas above the light fixture. And that may be something that really is going to be important when we start looking at light fixture styles and placement. And then finally, the last resort option, as I call it, is the type 4, and that's just where an applicant comes in, they're not willing to, or for some reason can't share poles on any of the previous 3 types, so they're proposing to put up a completely new pole in a new location. This obviously would contribute to the proliferation of vertical utility infrastructure, and this would be kind of a last case resort. They would need to demonstrate to the town why they can't utilize the type 1 through 3 poles in the location that they're envisioning. So these type poles, again, they don't necessarily have a light fixture on them. These would be more of just a telecommunications pole. You can see a couple of different designs there. They're pretty stealth looking, but again, it's a completely new structure in an area that doesn't really have. This is probably the kind of pole that you may see in subdivisions that have all underground utilities that don't have, street lights, at least taller street lights that are in the public rights of way. So this is probably the kind of poles that we could see there, because there's not really any other vertical utility systems that they can use. So there would be some additional aesthetic requirements I would recommend for these type 4 poles, because they are new in a new location. We would try, at least from a staff's perspective, we would encourage at least a dual technology or dual carrier on these poles, because that could potentially limit the number of poles. So that's the logic behind that. And then just try to make sure that the placement, the color, the component dimensions, and all that stuff is consistent and as stealth as possible for whatever utility is placed on the structure. And since these are also, like I mentioned, new poles and new locations, I think we need to have placement requirements or placement recommendations, depending on what it would be permitted under state law, with goals of, avoiding creating obstructions, hindering pedestrian traffic, trying to make sure that poles are placed in an alignment where they don't look kind of like a hodgepodge or a zigzag arrangement. Being cognizant of landscaping, trying to ensure that new poles are outside of the tree canopy so that disturbance to tree cover is avoided with the installation. When somebody's placing the pole, try to, especially in a residential development, let's look at the open space lots in that development. Can the structure be placed in the right of way in front of those open space lots? That's going to be your initial placement consideration. And then if you do have to put it in front of a house lot, arrange it on the side property line, not in the middle of a house. Try to minimize, again, the impact to the property owner. So again, an alignment like this would be appropriate. You got it out of the tree canopy. It's on a side property line, not right in front of a structure. So that's what we would want to be encouraging. As I mentioned earlier, the staff's not envisioning the aesthetic plan to apply to residential streetlights. As I mentioned, they're not required by the town. They're really decorative in nature, and each subdivision has its own style, its own placement, its own. I mean, they are limited to the height, 16 feet. But again, many of these are not within the public rights of ways. For example, the pole on the upper left is not within the public right of way. It's in the 10-foot utility easement that's just outside of the public right of way. So something that we may want to consider is if we want to just be clear that these are exempted from the aesthetic plan because of the right of way issue, then we may want to consider changing the subdivision regulations to actually require residential streetlights to be in the 10-foot easement and not give them the opportunity to put them in the right of way. Right now, they just have to be 10 feet setback from the street. So that could be in the right of way, but oftentimes they are set back further than that, which puts them in essentially on private property. When we're talking about an aesthetic plan, again, we have to think about any new vertical infrastructure to be equitable in how we apply this. So one thing we need to have a discussion about, and it probably is going to take a number of discussions, is light fixtures. Similar to what we're trying to do in the mixed-use town center with private developments, with the bell-shaped lights like you have up at the Starbucks. What a community does with its lighting system in its public spaces is really very critical to how it presents itself. It's often something people don't think about, but I believe gladly we did think about it with the Concord Road improvement, and we were lucky that the state worked with the town on that, because I think that's going to make a huge difference for that gateway portion of the town, having those decorative light fixtures there. So some of the questions that we need to think about here is if we want to come up with, light fixture standards for different parts of the town, maybe the gateway areas, or certainly the mixed-use town center or mixed-use neighborhood areas. Do we want to have different fixture requirements for residential areas versus commercial? Keeping in mind that we really couldn't ultimately address the height because of the state law to a point. If it's telecommunications, the state law allows you to go up to 40 feet and then 10 feet above that if there are other poles that are within 500 feet of the telecommunications pole. So the highest you could get in a residential area would be 50-foot pole. But at least we could address the appearance and the style, the light fixtures, and the other structures that may be placed on the pole. So some of the, again, this is on the left, obviously, is the current predominant light pole that we have along our arterial streets. The right side is the new decorative light fixture that you're seeing on Concord Road and South Campbell Station Road. I haven't actually seen these at night. I'm not sure if they're operational yet, but I imagine when they become operational, they're going to make a huge impact to that corridor. In some other areas, you can see where they've taken some arterial streets, and on the left there, they've actually kind of got a mixture of like a residential street light there in the median, then street lights to each side of the roadway. And same way over on the right side image where that one looks pretty similar to what we're doing on Concord Road with the decorative light fixture on the poles there. So those are some of the images of maybe some other fixtures that we might want to consider as corridors get improved or, developments occur, especially within our gateway areas and mixed-use town center. So with that, I guess the last slide here before I take any questions would be, what do we need to do at this point? And as I mentioned earlier, this is not a aesthetic plan. This is just throwing out some ideas and some information for y'all to think about. And then you can give me some guidance on what you want staff to work on and the public, get everybody's input and figure out what we need to work on. I think from our perspective, try to eliminate some subjectivity, ensure some predictability, be consistent with new installations, be very specific about what you want to see. As long as you apply it consistently with everybody, should be fine legally. Try to think about street lighting and how that's going to interface and relate with other utilities that could be on these new poles, namely telecommunications, and decide on a street light fixture that can accommodate telecommunications as well. So with that, I'll be happy to try to answer questions. I know that was a lot of me talking, and I'm sure you're ready for that to stop.
Mark, can I make a request? Because I know that we had quite a few citizens that wrote in.
Yeah, I do have some comments to read, yes.
Can we read those comments in, and then we can start with our discussion, because that's going to take a while.
Yeah, I can do that if that's what you all want. Let's see.
Mark, one of the letters had personal attacks on the mayor, and it seems like we ought to not enter that into the record based on our protocol for meetings.
Yes.
The first paragraph of the letter, of that particular letter, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yes, I've talked with the chairman about the protocol, because basically we just need to be consistent with what we would do in a regular meeting. So, and that's what we'll do here, is could be consistent with that public comment protocol. So I'll go ahead and read those, the ones that I have that are consistent with that. So the first comment I had was from Ken Chipley. He's at 11602 Gates Mill Drive. He says, how does the town of Farragut reconcile that they will own all of the PSS for small cell antennas? From page 16 of the small cells explanation document of the Tennessee Competitive Wireless Broadband Investment Deployment and Safety Act of 2018. Once an improved, new, or modified PSS has been installed, the PSS becomes the property of the city. Understandably, this fact sparked a number of questions and concerns On one hand, a city has an interest in maintaining control of public infrastructure for operational purposes. The city also has an obligation to ensure that taxpayers are kept whole for any investment in infrastructure that is subsequently removed and replaced. As such, it makes sense for a city to assume ownership of any pole or sign that is installed within its right of way, and that has such a profound impact upon safety. This seems that the financial burden of maintaining all these structures falls on Town of Farragut: traffic accidents, storm damage, rust, etc. Next comment is from Jerry Guthrie. My name is Jerry Guthrie, and I live in Village Green at 11745 Weather Vane Drive. I was at the December 19, 2019 Farragut Planning Commission meeting where the request for MCI Metro fiber installation was discussed. Recalling what was said at that meeting, very little was known about 5G at that time by board members or citizens in attendance. From research that I had done, I volunteered to speak and inform the board that the distance between small cell tower antennas would be at 500 feet or every 2 households. One thing that stood out by all people there was that no one wanted 5G in their front yard. That issue changed for me Thursday, June 11, 2020, when a U.S. Cellular public notice printed in the Farragut Press stated that they intend to place a 38-foot small cell tower on the right-of-way of my property. Our congressmen, federal and state, have passed laws allowing this to happen. They didn't take into consideration the health or well-being of the citizens of this country or the environment. Also, a cell tower in my front yard can cause my property value to decline 21%. Our congressmen's first responsibility should be to protect the health, safety, and welfare of citizens, and they have failed. The Farragut mayor and alderman should contact the governor, Bill Lee, and request that he sign an executive order that halts 5G tower construction in the front yards of Tennessee residents until such technologies have been proven safe beyond a reasonable doubt through independent research, and the public health and welfare can be assured. As intrusive and unwanted laws that 5G are allowed to stand, there will be unreasonable and long-lasting harm to the citizens of our community and the environment. Everyone should contact their congressman to get these laws changed ASAP. And that is that comment. I have a comment from Laura Squires at 236 Woodland Trace Drive. Item for public forum. In a May meeting, Tom Hell indicated Verizon has offered to send someone to discuss citizen concerns and provide information to GOMA and Planning Commission regarding 5G. I request that Farragut accept this offer and set up this type of forum with time for citizen questions after July 1, 2020. Item for aesthetic plan discussion, agenda item 9. Since February, I have requested of the town of Farragut to oppose and certainly not encourage any form of co-location of multiple 5G antenna or possibly 4G on the same pole. On June 16, Mark Shipley emailed this comment. Intent of an aesthetic plan would be to encourage dual function poles so that we can hopefully lessen the proliferation of new vertical infrastructure in our town. So yes, we would allow for and encourage more than one technology or user on a pole. Co-location, as I understand the intent, is to place the antenna on existing support structures, PSS, light poles or power poles. In an earlier meeting this year, I asked the town who on the committee that proposed multiple antenna on the same pole was an engineer or a radiation expert. David Smoke replied, no one involved was either. I have submitted the following question to the FCC on March 11 of 2020 and received no reply. Our town is proposing to require multiple antenna from multiple companies on the same pole. We need to understand if this was intended by the FCC and if multiple antenna in the same location may increase the radiation emission to a load that could be above the standard. I've submitted this question to Verizon of Tennessee on April 2 of 2020. How is the radiation dose to a person's body calculated from a 5G antenna, multiple antenna, if multiples from various companies are deployed in the same area? Again, a specific answer to this specific question was not received. General response was given, but no specifics related to this question. If Town of Farragut has data that to co-locate multiple antenna on the same pole is safe and does not increase the total radiation power density to the nearest homes, would you please share that tonight? Common sense will dictate that if one turns on 4 stove eyes in the kitchen, that the kitchen will quickly become hotter faster than if only 1 stove eye is turned on. Does the same principle apply to stacking multiple antenna on the same pole near some individuals' homes to spare others the eyesore of a pole in their yard? Why should any one home bear the radiation burden and property value impact to spare another? In my opinion, without long-term scientific data conclusively demonstrating no harm for the town, to encourage this idea is immoral and negligent. I ask all of you to cease discussion of encouraging this awful idea and to instead work to prohibit it, unless you hold long-term human data that it has been evaluated over long-term studies and poses no increased risk. Next comment is from Bill Harden, 613 Glen Willow Drive. Mike Mitchell has asked the mayor and vice mayor for 3 landowners, taxpayers to be included in the cell tower meeting tonight. Neither one of them has entered Mike Mitchell back. That is no way to conduct public forum business, but I'm preaching to the choir. You already know that. Isn't it against Tennessee state law to have more than 1 antenna on a pole? It was told to us by Verizon in the beginning, but each company would have to have a separate pole and separate antenna. Rules keep changing as we go. You and I both know this is not right. What you all are pulling off or trying to pull off for the citizens of Farragut, Tennessee. Stand up for the people that elected you. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Watching and waiting for your response about this. Next comment is from Judith Galloway. And I'm trying to think of where. Not sure she provided her address. Let me go on to the next one after that. Martin and David Schaffner, 11224 Sonia Drive is the next comment. I believe strongly that the public should be allowed to participate from the first step of information gathered and discussion about aesthetics for the proposed 5G poles. Questions should be allowed at this meeting in order for us to, as public members, to play a role in something that will affect us so strongly, our property value. I also believe the public should be participants in every discussion, proposal, and information gathering event about something that has such a potential effect on the health of each of us in this community. We have every right to have more information as to the safety of having 1 or more of these cellular devices on a single pole. Is there a state law that speaks to this and requires it in any way? Please respond to us on this matter via email. And I have a comment from Mike Mitchell. And let's see. I don't think he provided his address either. I've got that. Let me go on to the next one. I have Kathy Sharp is the next one. She resides at 716 Woodchase Drive. Thank you for working so hard to keep our community running so smoothly. I would like to ask that the public be included in the meetings as before the virus shut us down. I do respect that social distancing is required and face mask, or maybe we could join virtually to the meetings. Please reconsider opening up the meetings to the public in some fashion. I and others would like to be part of our community decisions, or at least feel included and have a voice. I have been informed that cellular companies may put more than one device by even different vendors on the same pole at the same location. This aesthetically concentrates the eyesore while concentrating the electromagnetic radiation. These concentrated locations could very well exceed the safety requirements. Since no one is making measurements, no one would know the dangers. This doesn't sound safe. Is co-location required under Tennessee law? Would you please email me back and let me know? I'm looking into buying several meters to make baseline measurements around the community of Farragut before we get flooded with these extra EMFs. I will publish these results and probably set up a website so that everyone can see the effects of these installations. It would be better if our community would take on this endeavor to serve the general public. I don't mind to be part of a working group to take measurements and develop a database and website for the documentation and information distributed for our community. Let's see. Next comment is from Rich Compton at Farragut Hills Boulevard, 11118 Farragut Hills Boulevard. I'd like to thank fellow Farragut residents for encouraging others via social media to be more active in town meetings. My comment is specific to agenda item 9. I want to commend the town of Farragut and specifically this board for doing what's in the town's power to help ensure the new poles that support new 5G infrastructure meet the aesthetic standard expected from Farragut residents. The two that I haven't read did not provide their address. So I'm not sure if you want me to go ahead and read those or not.
We require an address.
Okay. I do not see an address on these two. So that was in my write-up on the website too with the packet. I included that specifically as a requirement. So. Okay, that's all I have.
Anybody on the Planning Commission have questions for Mark?
Are you going to poll us for questions, or are we just supposed to speak up here?
Do you want me to do that? Is that your pleasure, Chairman? You want me to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Myers. Commissioner Myers.
Commissioner Myers is still awake, and he does not have any questions.
Well, that's probably better than most people should be after listening to me for that long. Commissioner Dick.
Could you give us a copy of that so I have something to think about again?
Could you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Give me a copy of your suggestions on the aesthetic plan, and so that I can think about them.
So you want to email of the PowerPoint? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Russ.
Yeah, I just had one question about the description, how we've got it listed as the typical vertical utility types. The type 4, it says that it's a new freestanding pole for a single utility, and I've just got a little bit of confusion around that when we get scroll down a few pages into that description where it says that
Yeah.
it mentions some co-locating on there where it could be for a single, for more than single use. I'm trying to find that where I'd seen that.
Well, really what I'm talking about there, and again, all this information is just to generate discussion. It's, nothing's been polished
Right.
out on this. What I was trying to say there is you've got a pole that is only there for one utility type. Now, it could be a pole that has antenna for two different
Mark, can I
telecommunication
interrupt you for a
companies.
minute? People who aren't talking, can they mute their microphones so that I'm getting a lot of feedback?
I think Betty Dick is the only one that shows that it's not muted.
Okay. Yeah, that and that could be a little confusing, and that's something we can tweak. But the type 4 pole is really just, you don't have lighting on it. It's basically where you don't have existing street lighting in the system already, so you're just going in an area that probably doesn't have any vertical utility. It might have some residential street lights. And it would be for, in this case, really telecommunications. It would either be a pole that would accommodate at least two providers, or two different types of technologies. Maybe a pole that has the capability to have a 5 and 4G, or a pole that could accommodate AT&T and Verizon. But it would be one type of utility that it would be serving, essentially.
Right, I see that too, because on page 119 again, it says new freestanding pole for single utility. But when you get down to the description, it says type 4 pole shall provide for at least dual technology or dual carriers. And I guess once we get down the road a little bit, I think there's going to be some more clarity needed around that.
Yeah, dual technology it's still the same one utility, but it's just dual technology for that particular utility. So like 4 and 5G is what I'm talking about with dual technology. Is that, again, the goal is to try to lessen the number of new poles, really. Now, if the community wants to just have a single antenna on each pole, that's up to you all. I know that's a lot of the comments that we received are concerned about having more than one antenna on a pole, but the intent obviously was to try to lessen the overall number of poles that we're going to have in the community, especially in these areas where it could be the only vertical infrastructure that's there.
Right, I agree with that. And again, you just mentioned it too. A lot of the comments were around that type 4 pole and whether to permit co-location. And again, early on, I think that was something that we were, heavily vested in looking into whether that was a viable option. And it seems like from the letters, it's a divisive topic at the moment too. So I think need to be some more language around that for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, you would think it would benefit the community and the provider, because they're not having to go to the expense of adding as many poles as they otherwise would have to add, and then the community's not getting as many poles. You can certainly have dual providers on the same pole. There's nothing illegal or wrong about that. Again, what you're doing is, with the aesthetic requirements, you're setting the requirements that would be in place and consistently applied to anybody that's deploying any new vertical structures in your community. So as long as you're applying all that consistently, then you should be in good shape. Again, it's really going to be a question, if the community just wants one carrier on the pole, then that's up to the community, But that obviously was a concern that I just read into the record from a number of residents.
Right. Thank you, Mark.
Let's see. Commissioner Kyle.
Well, I think from the comments that were made, the big issue that the concern about being multiple providers on the same pole is the health and safety issue, not the aesthetic,
Yeah.
that this is dealing with. But I do think we'll have to take that into account eventually. I have to tell you that I think this project is going to be as detailed as, if not more so, than the sign ordinance. So I hope you'll have somebody there that's going to be with you, Mark, and all that. You got a lot of ideas there.
Thank you. That made my night.
Take care.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all for me.
Okay. Commissioner Green.
Yes, I do have some comments. First of all, who did all the work? Somebody put a lot of time and effort into this, and it's a really great starting point, both with all the text and who rounded up all the photos, which are very helpful.
I did most all of it. I did obviously borrow like planners do. We do steal from other communities. Rarely do we have an original idea.
That leads to my next point. It
Yeah.
looks like we've got an awful lot of work to do. That's the bad news. The good news is it looks like there are many communities around the nation that have already gone through this. And as I started to compare them, I looked at three, one from Brentwood, Tennessee, another one from Carrollton, Georgia, and another one from Greenwood Village, Colorado, that Vice Mayor Louise Pavlin provided. And you start to see a lot of similarity between them. And I think the similarity comes from the common objections and the common laws that are written that we're dealing with. So I guess the good news is you've got a lot of examples that you can pick and choose from. So you're really not starting from a blank piece of paper.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to mention is that when I looked at your discussion paper here, your PowerPoint, and I looked at some of the examples that I just mentioned, I didn't see anything in your PowerPoint regarding the maintenance and future removal or decommissioning or whatever you want to call it of poles. And it seems to me that ought to be in there somewhere, that people, if they're not going to use it anymore, that they need to take it down or do something with it.
Yeah. I mean, and
to maintain it while it's being used.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be an element of something. I mean, it could be an element of the aesthetic plan. But certainly anything that somebody puts on our property, we need to have some kind of a process in place to where, if it's no longer needed, that it can be removed and not be removed at the expense of the town.
And my last comment is the hardest one. Do we have any kind of a general timetable that we have in mind for trying to develop this aesthetic plan? I
think Lizanne just told me it's going to be a year. So it took about a year to do the sign ordinance.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be quicker than that.
Well, this is June, so I don't know. Well, anyway, it seems like we ought to have kind of a target. I understand it's just kind of a guess, but it seems like we ought to have kind of a target.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just tonight I'm trying to get some initial feedback on the different components that we might want to look at for a aesthetic plan. We can make it relatively simple. I mean, if we want, if you really break it down, what we're trying to do is make the massing as small as possible, have as few poles as you can, make the structures on the poles close to the pole. Don't have anything that's exposed. So it's just, basically just poles with wider portions for like the equipment cabinet and the cantenna. That's kind of, to me, the goal. And I think it, at least from my perspective, ought to be the standard for anywhere in the town, whether it has existing overhead utilities or not. If they're going to put a new pole in an area and they can't, for some reason, utilize the three types of existing poles, then it needs to meet that very strict standard that we would have for the type 4 poles.
That's the only comments and questions I had. Thank you, Mark. It's a really great start. I appreciate all the work you put into it.
All right, thank you. Vice Chairman St. Clair.
And again, thank you for all the hard work you put into this. But on page, it's 147 out of 156. It's in the Type 4 poll section. There's a sketch talks about Type 4 poles should be placed on or in line with property lines separating adjoining lots. What are you trying to convey with dimensions shown? Not sure I understand that slide. I understand what you're trying to say, but I don't understand what's there.
Yeah, what it's showing is just trying to keep the pole at least 15 feet from the tree trunk, to keep it out of the drip line, and to keep it,
Well, I understood the tree. He's getting slightly talking about 15 feet from the canopy, and I don't know. I think in terms of canopy being
we'll have to
trunk.
modify that a little bit.
And I don't understand the 5 foot minimum at all. I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, the state law it allows you to move these new telecommunication poles, depending on the size of the lot, 15 or 25 feet. So we'd have to tailor that more. That was an image that I think we got from one of the communities in Colorado, just to show basically that the idea is to try to keep it clear of the tree canopy and to situate it on a side property line instead of in front of a structure. So that's something that we need to tailor that more to what we're talking about.
I guess more contextual than saying what you took it out of. Yes. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you. I think I knew what the intent was.
I think if I just got rid of the 5 and 15 feet, it would be very clear it's much shows you where we're trying to encourage these poles to be placed, so it's not sitting right in front of somebody's, front door.
Exactly.
Yep.
I didn't have anything else.
Any other? Let's see, where am I at here? Chairman Holliday.
I've got 2 or 3 questions here. One from one aspect to keep on with what Ed was talking about there. Not blocking the view when somebody's trying to get out of their driveway or some kind of entrance to a business and all. The blocking of view is a point with me. Also, it looks like they would really want all their things that are hanging off of some of those poles to be inside of the pole for safety and security reasons. Is that something you've read anything about or gotten any comments on?
Yeah, I think a lot of the newer installations, especially in communities that have the standards in place, they're putting them as much as they can inside the pole, and it would seem to me that it would be better for the conduit's lifespan and certainly for its appearance. But yeah, I think to me it would make sense to put it in the pole as well, because you already got the pole out there. It might make it a little bit harder to get to, but you just have to have some handholds throughout the pole so you could access different sections for maintenance purposes.
Well, seeing some of that stuff hanging off and having lots of parts to it looks to me like a very big thing up there for some people to want to fool with, play with, steal, whatever. That's one. And then my final thing, I guess, here is in your research, were you able to find very many places that were able to get the companies to use the same pole?
Yeah, there is that. Like I mentioned earlier, it would seem to me that it really would benefit the carrier to do that too, because if they could work together, because then they have less overall infrastructure cost, because they're able to share structure. Same way with trying to work out, in the case of our community, an agreement with LCUV to put antenna on existing overhead utility distribution line systems, because then they don't have to worry about, going to the expense of putting up a new pole and maintaining it to the degree they would have to with their own new equipment. So it would seem to me it would benefit the applicants as well to try to use a type 1 through 3 pole instead of going with the type 4. So I think that's a good point.
I think that's basically my questions. I am interested too in finding out a little bit more about if we can find out from some source, does more equipment you have on a pole cause more radiation? That is something I think we need to look into if we can.
Yeah.
That kind of information is probably not as readily available, but
Yep.
So you've answered my third question already with chances of getting more than one company on one pole is greater than what I might have thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a possibility. I mean, a lot of times these applicants come to the communities and say they can't do something, but they really can. And really, when they think about it, it should make financial sense for them to do it anyway, if they can, to try to work out and share vertical infrastructure. So hopefully that'll be the case as we try to work through this in more detail. We try to present it as a win-win for everybody.
And I think, like you said, reaching out to other places that have already gone through this is very helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of different places. So yeah, that's always a good starting point. So Vice Mayor Pavlin.
I have some questions, but I wanted to make some comments before I ask my questions, because I felt like from the emails we received that I really needed to address one particular subject that not many people were aware of with regard to the request to delay this item until we can have a public meeting to start up again. If time was not an issue, I would have been fine with delaying this conversation a month, but I had some concerns. So I reached out to the Sweetbriar HOA to discuss this request for postponement. They, as well as Stonecrest, Farragut View, and Woodland Trace, have been on the receiving end of a pretty aggressive campaign to implement 5G in their neighborhoods with fiber already installed. With regard to poles, Sweetbriar is the only neighborhood of the 4 that does not currently have poles in their neighborhood. I explained to the Sweetbriar HOA board members that my concern was in postponing this item, we run the risk of not having an aesthetics plan adoption process in place when Verizon drops their next application at Town Hall, in which case we won't have any say in how these fixtures look in a neighborhood that has no poles currently. With the process started, we have a leg to stand on to resist the poles Verizon would propose. I would like to at least preserve the one right we do have. The HOA was in full agreement that we needed to proceed with this, and I believe with this PowerPoint and this discussion we're having tonight, we now have our stake in the ground. We can take our time to get this right. We start, hopefully, fingers crossed, this is our last web meeting because it's not enjoyable for us either, and the public can be a part of the questioning. But here is my frustration. There are a lot of angry folks in Farragut. We received a lot of angry and in some cases very disrespectful emails. I get it. The town of Farragut has been rendered impotent to stop this assault on our neighborhoods by a state law that completely removes local control over most aspects of implementation of 5G. I did not pass this law, and yet I am continually assaulted for its results. I am angry too. I have encouraged people to be educated about the state law and its impact on us locally. I have sent the state law out to many people who don't seem inclined to really dig into what it says. So I have a Reader's Digest version of the state law. In essence, it states the following. The Tennessee General Assembly does not care what we think at the local level regarding the implementation of 5G small cell technology. The general synopsis is as follows. The state law governing the deployment of potential support structures, PSS, and small cell forbids a city from dictating the placement of a PSS. It forbids a city from limiting the distance between the PSS. It forbids a city from limiting the height of the PSS beyond the height restrictions in the state law. It forbids us from requiring co-location of a small cell on a specific PSS, such as an existing utility pole. Further, a city may not dictate or alter the design of a provider's network, nor can a city limit the number of different carriers in the community. So, here's an example. Verizon has already laid fiber in some residential neighborhoods. We are anticipating that they will be applying for poles to deploy 5G in the near future to add to the current ones that they've already applied for. Because we can't limit the companies who wish to deploy 5G in our residential neighborhoods, we may see more enter the market. For example, AT&T. What if they decide they would like to deploy 5G antennas in Sweetbriar? There's nothing we can do about it. If AT&T designs a network that matches in pole placement Verizon's plan, there is nothing we can do about it. Are we really going to allow two poles to be erected right next to each other? Or if we're lucky and AT&T is feeling magnanimous, they may be willing to move it across the street or down to the next property line, thereby placing two poles in front of one house on either side. Certainly, we need to understand the emissions of these antennas, and certainly we need clarity on what that emission looks like. And each neighborhood where these are proposed, I think, should deserve the flexibility to say, we'd rather have more poles or we'd rather have co-location. I think that is an option that we need to keep in our aesthetic plan. But I am very frustrated with the utter disrespect people seem to want to show through their emails. I did not put this in place. I am stuck trying to deal with something that is assaulting people I represent, and I'm angry about it, and I'm frustrated that there's a group of people that are enjoying whipping people up unnecessarily, telling untruth, and misleading people. It is not right. This is hard enough and emotional enough as it is. We, as a town, need to come together and work on this, but we do not have a lot of say in the matter. So we need to work on the things that we can deal with, and this aesthetic plan is one of them. Getting off my soapbox so I can ask you some questions, Mark, because I really appreciate the effort that you made in this. Where would we include language regarding RF emissions and that they remain within FCC guidelines with co-location? Is that something that is handled in the application or the approval by the Planning Commission, or where is where would that language be included?
I think, well, I mean, I'd have to talk with the town attorney a little bit about it, but I think the proper place to put that would probably be in the antennas section of the zoning ordinance that we created or amended back in 2017.
Okay. And
yeah, because it's not necessarily dealing with aesthetics directly. It's more, yes. And again, the aesthetic plan is not just for telecommunications. It's for any new vertical structures that might be in our public rights of ways. So okay. That's something to think about. A light pole's not going to have that kind of consideration. So really it would be an antenna that would or a small cell deployment that we would potentially want to have that as part of the application process, the verification process. And there are some communities I looked at that have some language dealing with that. I don't think any of them that I recall were in Tennessee, but
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I mean, I would think it's reasonable that we can ask for verification of compliance with the applicable FCC regulations that would apply to that deployment, because it's a federal law that, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for a community to ask for the applicant to verify that they're complying with the federal law.
And including, we need to be, whatever we're asking for, we need clarity if two are co-located, that
Yeah, sure.
that it still remains comfortably within the FCC guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I know this is a tough question to ask. How are we going to be able to control the symmetrical appearance regarding the heights of these poles in residential areas?
Well, it would depend. Yeah, I mean, it would depend on, you're talking about a residential area that just has subdivision street lights?
Yes, no, even that. I'm specifically thinking, because I know Sweetbriar's there, they don't have any light poles. They have no poles whatsoever. So Verizon's going to come in and apply for some poles. I guess, I don't know if they've finished laying fiber in the first part of Sweetbriar or not.
Well, that's what the aesthetic standard would be. I mean, it would be to me, it would be a prescriptive demonstration of what you're requiring all the carriers to follow. So whatever your dimensions, your maximum dimensions are for the different components of the structure, would apply. So AT&T and Verizon or US Cellular are going to have to basically follow the same thing. So you won't have ideally you wouldn't have a situation like what happened on Parkside Drive with the Zayo and the AT&T deployments there, with the antennas being very different in appearance and in placement on the pole. Because that would be something that would be part of the aesthetic plan, is, basically a lot of these these diagrams that we had could be your aesthetic standard for these poles. And then that's what you're going to hold everybody to. You include some dimensions there, and that could be an element of your aesthetic plan. If they put light fixtures on them, they'll have to follow the aesthetic plan as well.
Okay, that leads me to the next question. Can neighborhoods establish their own light fixture appearance? Like Sweetbriar, for example, decides, we're going to have these light fixtures. We'd like them to look like this.
Yeah.
And it may be different.
Well, I think what needs to happen there is, an assumption is that we're going to get some of these poles. And so if these communities want to have lights in the rights of ways, I mean, I guess they're going to have to be ultimately the ones that maintain them and pay for it. Just like I do in my subdivision, we have street lights in ours, but the HOA has to pay for it. But yeah, that would be part of the aesthetic standard. Now, maybe there would be some flexibility if a subdivision wanted to have a green pole because they have some kind of a theme associated with their development, or they have a lot of green or brown on their clubhouse building or something that just blends in better than maybe a black pole. There should be some flexibility with that kind of stuff, but generally the structural components and the appearance and the bulk of the structure should be pretty consistent.
Okay.
Now the placement is going to vary because the rights of ways vary in terms of where you might find conflicts or trees or other things that could potentially be
Well, they don't place. They don't put.
It shouldn't make it a huge difference of placement, like several feet away, and they're all going to have to be pretty close to the curb to be in the right of way.
Okay. Mine is more, well, you're right. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at is we'd like, in my vision, And I know that doesn't get to come to reality. I'd like to see as much consistency as possible so that these look like light poles and were intended to be there for light poles. Although I understand that Sweetbriar residents don't even want lights, but I would suggest to them that they take the lights and then not power them so that they at least have the appearance of a light pole.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And not just a pole standing.
No, that's absolutely a part of your standard. You could have inactive light fixtures just to make it look like something other than a telecommunications pole. That would definitely be something. I've seen some of those in some documents I've looked at. So a lot of communities, they don't want a lot of lighting in their residential areas. They may have dark skies requirements. They want to be able to see the stars, at night. So a lot of times what I've seen in those communities, they'll have the pole and it looks just like a light pole, but it doesn't work. But it also has telecommunications on it. So,
and I've heard that from a few Sweetbriar residents. Of course, I think that's a decision that they would need to make, that they are so close to Turkey Creek that they already have enough they have light pollution in their neighborhood, and they don't really want to add lights. And certainly that's a decision for each individual residential community to make.
I think it could be certainly. I think it could all be reviewed on a subdivision by subdivision basis if they wanted to do that. I think you need to have some basic parameters in place, but then have some other things that you could have some flexibility with, so that you end up with the overall goal, but it's tailored toward the subdivision or development that it's being associated with.
And leading to that, I would include co-location into that. Ultimately, the neighborhood in that area should be, it should be up to the individual neighborhoods. They should be fully educated about the opportunities there. Do they want co-location or do they want more poles?
Yeah, sure.
And that could be a discussion for them. I'm going to put a side note because I keep saying this and I think it's important. I know that you have a lot on your plate right now, but I think we need to look at our tree protection ordinance to clarify the protection of our public trees with regard to this utility coming in. We need clarity on when a utility can, under what conditions a utility can touch a tree. And it certainly should not be, this utility should not be able to remove any trees simply because it wants a clearer shot of.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
So I think it's very important because I would not put it past Verizon or AT&T to come in and start saying, oh, well, we got to remove this tree and that tree. And that's absolutely unacceptable. And in the state law, it does say things about vegetation control. And we've had a longstanding tree protection ordinance. So Laura Squires did provide some language a couple of months ago that I think we should entertain. That was very simple and to the point of how to maybe amend that. So
if you don't think of it, send me that. And but I'm a tree hugger, so I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question is: you have a lot of questions in here. Would it be helpful for us, because this is going to take a lot to digest, for us to try to answer these questions and give you a little bit more feedback via email?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, and it really is just a starting point for discussion is all this PowerPoint was for. I think it's been maybe understood as a aesthetic plan. It really is not that. It's just throwing out a bunch of ideas, things we might want to consider. What are we ultimately trying to potentially control, and how we might want to do that.
Yeah.
I do think street lighting is, on our non-local streets is really something that the community, we've talked about streetscape plans on gateway areas in the past, lighting makes such a huge impact on how you present your community. So I do think it would be a good discussion with this aesthetic plan to try to talk about what kind of light fixtures we want to see in the future in the town as fixtures get transitioned out or roads get improved and, systems get altered, like on Concord Road. I'm hopeful that that's going to make a big visual impact to that corridor.
Yeah. Those were, okay, so I'm just going to have to sit with this. I do appreciate the structure that you've given us, labeling them type 1, 2, 3, and 4 poles. I think it's a good place to start. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay. Mayor Williams.
Okay. Yes. Well, I'll start off with I really appreciate all the reasonable public input that we've had and will have in the future as we will all have taken notes and will go over this, think about the questions. This is something that will affect all the Farragut citizens, every one of us. And just for clarity, so everyone will know, because there seems to be some confusion along this line, I signed a personal copy of the resolution to the following people, and it has been sent to them, and that is Governor Bill Lee, Speaker Cameron Sexton, Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, Representative Jason Zachary, Representative Justin Lafferty, Senator Richard Briggs, Senator Becky Massey, Congressman Tim Burchett, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Senator Lamar Alexander, and SCC Chairman, and I'm going to butcher his name because I think it's a Jacques Pay. But with that said, at this time, let's all try to focus on developing the aesthetic plan based on what Mark has given us, and we need to do that right now. We need to get this right to start with, and then move on to the next step. There will be a TASER study that this summer, and we hope that there will be some health studies involved with that will give some of these representatives some direction. And when the next time that they go into session in January, I think that and with the lights, I'll move on. The design for each subdivision should be for each subdivision. It should be based on what they have now. It may be based on what type of street sign they have to match that up. If it's black, if it's green, or whatever. And I know that some of the neighborhoods would want lights and some of them would not. In my neighborhood, we made it mandatory that all 4 neighbors by this light would sign off on it before we'd put one in. That was something that you wanted to make sure that the neighbor beside you, the neighbor across the street, and the other one from him wanted the same thing you did before you would turn this light on. It could be a street light design like what Mark said, but not be turned on. Some of them would want it on, some of them may not want it on. It may be that they want it on at the bus stop in the mornings so that their kids can see, and your drivers can see the kids that's standing there at the bus stop to keep them from getting run over. But anyway, with this presentation, I again want to give Mark and his staff kudos on this. It's great. It's a starting point for all of us. I hope everybody has taken notes and have a copy of this. If not, then please let us know by email, and we can send you just a copy of this presentation. I know that a lot of people didn't want to try to print out all 150 something pages of this agenda, and I don't blame them. I didn't either. But so I asked for a separate one, and to where I could study it. But I think we all need to sit back and get our notes together and be ready to ask questions, to have input on this aesthetic plan, and actually just stop the misinformation that's been out there. That's not helping things one bit. We need to get on with a focus on this particular thing right here, and then let TASSER do their work. Hopefully they'll have some studies that are health oriented, that where they can learn something. And if we can do this, I think we can get something that will work for us from now on. And that's all I've got. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? But yeah, if you get a chance to go through the PowerPoint, and you want to email me some thoughts or comments, or if you see some website or something that has some good information that you think might be relevant, anything you can send me would be helpful. And we can try to keep working on this and building a framework for an aesthetic plan. It's a lot of stuff to consider, and it gets very complicated the more you kind of get into it. And then, of course, we got to make sure that whatever we end up proposing will pass the legal parameters. So I'll have to work with Tom a lot on that. But yeah, anything, and if anybody needs a copy, I know Betty said she did. If anybody else needs a copy of the PowerPoint, I can print out one, and I could either maybe print two or three slides on one page and do front and back. It won't really be that much paper. If anybody needs it that way, just let me know, and I can make copies and put them downstairs at the front desk, make them available. So does anybody else have anything on this one?
Let me ask a question, Mark. Who else are we talking about besides Verizon and AT&T? Do we have any other providers in town?
Well, we have U.S. Cellular, and that's what Mr. Guthrie was referring to. That's right. They have like a historic properties evaluation that they have to do for these new deployments. I don't think there are any in this particular location, but we met with them some time ago. So they may have 2 or 3 small cell poles that they're looking at in the near future in different locations. So they know they have to apply and go through the process, but so that's the third one that we've dealt with a little bit. It's mostly been Verizon at this point, but again, it could be 3 or 4 or 5 different entities by the time all this settles out. So there's a lot of uncertainty really about all of this at this point.
I was at the Spectrum office today. This is Roseanne. And they had big signs on their windows, 5G is here. I'm not aware that Spectrum would be having 5G towers. They use Verizon, don't they?
I'm not really sure, to be honest.
That was my understanding, but I didn't ask them. So I just didn't know whether Spectrum would be like AT&T and Verizon and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't either. Okay.
Yeah, not sure. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty out there about it, so it's kind of a moving target sometimes. All right.
So we'll move on to item number 10, which I hate to ask this question. Approval of utilities.
Yeah, we don't have any submitted for this evening, no.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't, okay. But we do have under the next item, we've got some comments I need to read into the record.
Okay. And this is the item number 11, citizen forum. and it's comments that comply with our public comments protocol.
Yes, they do. So these are items that are not on the agenda, relate to items that are not on the agenda. And I'll go ahead and read these into the record. The first one is from Jeff Goodman. He's at 12923 Buckmill Lane. In opposition of the subject connection, this is talking about the Ivy Farms connection at Pecos Road and Saddle Ridge Subdivision. In opposition of the subject connection, please be advised that the Town of Farragut has still not addressed to date 3 significant issues associated with the connection. Town of Farragut has not performed a traffic impact assessment for inside the subdivision as a result of the change in Pecos Saddle Ridge Drive rights of way. Town of Farragut has not considered the increase in potential conflicts between vehicles and children/families en route to and from the Saddle Ridge Clubhouse and pool as a result of increased traffic and in consideration of the existing location of the clubhouse and pool. Town of Farragut has not offered any remedies to reduce the impact on Saddle Ridge Subdivision. Meaningful consideration by the Town of Farragut on the above issues is again requested. The next comment is from Ashley Kendall at 12804 Pecos Road. Thank you to the Commission for allowing this public forum opportunity under the circumstances. I'm writing to again voice opposition to the Ivy Farms subdivision connection to Saddle Ridge. We have been unable to brief the Commission since November due to the holidays in late 2019, early 2020, the 5G meeting in February 2020, the change in the public forum time at the March 2020 meeting. The run around the town put us on with chasing the developer and the impacts of COVID-19 since March. As I voiced prior, the connection as currently proposed will create unnecessary risk for our residents, especially those with young children. As you know, Saddle Ridge is a neighborhood that has high pedestrian traffic by way of residents walking, children on bikes, kids playing outside, families walking their dogs, and families and young adolescents making their way on foot or on bike to the Saddle Ridge Clubhouse and pool, which is located at the end of Saddle Ridge Drive, just south of Pecos. This is especially the case during the COVID outbreak and usually between the months of March and November each year. Also, there is a bus stop at the corner of Pecos Road and Saddle Ridge Drive. New developments always affect the efficiency and safety of already established streets and neighborhoods, and that is no different here. The increased vehicular traffic that will result from Ivy Farms subdivision onto Pecos Road, combined with the heavy pedestrian traffic, will result in the increased safety risks that the residents of Saddle Ridge pose. Though the connection allows the town and the developer to check a box for having a second emergency exit, that shouldn't result in complete open access that will degrade the health, safety, and security of the residents within Saddle Ridge and statistically increase the possibility of personal injury to our families and our children. I hope that the Commission considers these comments in good faith and will push its staff to think about the broader policy considerations and the fact that ensuring public health and safety should outweigh an unjustified desire to have regular vehicular connectivity. Thank you for your time and service. And then, let's see, last comment is from Jeff Kendall at 12804 Pecos Road. This public comment is being submitted to refocus the Commission on the ongoing issue of the Pecos Road connection between the Ivy Farms development and Saddle Ridge neighborhood. As you know, Saddle Ridge residents have been engaged with you on this issue going back to 2018. Recall, the Ivy Farms subdivision revised concept plan and preliminary plat were discussed at length and modified during the March 2019 Commission meeting. Since then, different collections of Saddle Ridge residents have been engaged with the town staff and the Commission, appearing during public forum at roughly 6 meetings in 2016. In November 2019, the Saddle Ridge Homeowners Association sent the commission a letter that outlined all the issues with the Pecos Road connection. 1, increased traffic, degrading the safety and well-being of residents. 2, lack of any traffic impact study. 3, sequencing concerns related to Kingston Pike connection, Union Road improvement, etc. And 4, increased theft and robbery risk. Your staff at the town sent a response in late November, which fell well short of what the Saddle Ridge Homeowners Association expected. The positions throughout were unreasonable, short-sighted on multiple fronts, and flew in the face of representations made by the commission during and after the March 2019 commission meeting. The town's letter indicated as follows. Connection to Pecos Road is scheduled to take place during phase 1 of the development of Ivy Farm Subdivision. Once this connection does take place, the town will be willing to put up road closed barriers on a temporary basis until one of the following 2 things takes place. 1, the number of building permits issued in phase 1 reaches 75% of the total buildable lots in that phase, or 2, final plat for phase 3 of the Ivy Farm subdivision is recorded. We were told in no uncertain terms at the March 2019 commission meeting that the road would not be considered for opening until phase 3 was complete. This position, among all the town's positions, is the most untenable in direct contravention of what the commission told residents at the March 2019 meeting when the plat was modified to quell our concerns and back us off our position. This is disconcerting on a personal level. Technical and policy disagreements are one thing, but overt misrepresentations are another. Following the letter exchange, a meeting was facilitated on December 12, 2019 among town staff David Smoke, Daryl Smith, and Mark Shipley, members of the SRHA board, and residents of Saddle Ridge. The residents and the board were appreciative for the meeting and the staff's time. However, little progress was made, and the staff doubled down on its positions in the letter. Town staff wants to take a wait-and-see approach for the traffic impacts, though such an approach is reckless given that Pecos Road is ill-prepared for regular traffic on day 1 for numerous reasons, including, without limitation, non-existent traffic calming measures, a lack of sidewalks, the straight, unimpeded, nearly quarter-mile stretch to Saddle Ridge Drive, and the fact that lower Saddle Ridge on the Pecos side serves as a common use social pathway for access for our neighborhood pool and clubhouse, especially during the summer months. Since the meeting, we have waffled back and forth with little response from the developer after being directed to do so by the town. Now our residents are more concerned than ever about the connection, as has been articulated since early 2018 and put forth by the Homeowners Association's letter. Mutual compromise would be for the commission to allow the Pecos Road connection to go forward, but that it be designed strictly for emergency vehicle use and pedestrian traffic. This could easily be accomplished through the installation of a gate, bollards, or a raised bank, sidewalk, walking trail with a sign, each of which would satisfy the town's desire for alternative emergency access points in and out of Ivy Farms and for additional pedestrian bicycle connectivity. Further to the point about installing an emergency access point gate, the town regulations clearly allow the commission to waive the requirement there. No more than one public vehicular access into and out of developments. Town Municipal Code Part 2, Appendix B, Subdivisions, Article 2, Subpart A, Streets, Section 18, and the 2012 International Fire Code explicitly allow the gates to be installed and used to satisfy the requirement there be 2 separate and approved fire apparatus access roads for the Saddle Ridge subdivision. Specifications of such fire apparatus access road gates are plainly laid out at IFC section D 103.5. We need members of the commission who set the policy for our town, push town staff to consider the broader policy trade-offs between having regular vehicular connectivity, which is unnecessary, and ensuring safety and well-being of the Saddle Ridge residents. Thank you, and we look forward to continued engagement on this issue. And that is all I have under citizen forum. If anybody has any questions?
Motion to adjourn.
Everybody's still there.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Second?
I second that.
All right. Commissioner Myers, so you're still awake. Oh, he might be gone. Commissioner Dick?
Yes.
Dick, yes? Okay. Commissioner Russ?
Yes, still awake.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner
Was that the
Kyle?
question?
Yes, and farewell to you folks.
Thank you,
Yes.
Roseanne.
Thank you, Roseanne, for your
Thank you.
service.
Commissioner Green?
Yes.
Vice Chairman St. Clair? Is he gone? Chairman Holliday?
No, I'm here. Yes.
Oh, you're there. Okay, yeah. Chairman Holliday?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Pavlin?
Yes.
And Mayor Williams. Okay.
Yes.
It appears to be 8-0.
2020 meeting of the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission is adjourned.
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks again, Roseanne.
Be safe, and Roseanne, thank you for your service.